Everyone. Today's event is hosted by Resist US-led War, along with other partners. My name is Carly Brook, and I'm part of the Secretariat of the Resist US-led War movement. Um, Resist is a global network of anti-war and pro-just peace organizations and individuals, and we're so happy to have everyone here today and to be joined by partners and members of Resist, including the Juventud Unida por la Independencia, Veterans for Peace, Madres contra la Guerra, Honor the Earth, Flamboyant Theater, and I'm happy to introduce our panelists here today, who hopefully you can see on the screen for this really important conversation. Um, Happy to introduce Sonia Santiago Hernandez. She's the founder and spokesperson of Mothers Against the War, a community-based organization established on May 1st, 2003 in Puerto Rico. Sonia is a psychologist and peace activist and has devoted her life to denouncing militarization, promoting conscientious objection, and defending human rights of veterans, families affected by war, and Puerto Rican youth. Her work combines academic research and social activism to advance peace, justice, and demilitarization. Next, I'm welcoming Dr. Josh Shirley, who is an Army veteran and former conflict researcher from California's Central Valley, where he teaches political science. He currently serves as the National Vice President of Veterans for Peace, an organization dedicated to exposing the true costs of war and advocating for peace at home and peace abroad. Um, Next, I'll welcome Wendy Bravo, who is a native U.S. veteran and leads the Decolonize You program at Honor the Earth, which is an Indigenous-led organization fighting to dismantle settler colonialism, racial capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism. We also have John Marcantoni Rosa, who is a Puerto Rican U.S. Army veteran and founder of Flamboyant Theater based in Colorado. And last but not least is Coco, the Secretary General of Juventud Unida por la Independencia, based out of New York. So welcome everyone. I see so much applause and so much energy in the chat. We're really happy to be here. It's a very serious, urgent time for the world. And hopefully today's event can contribute to strengthening our movement, bringing more people into the fold of this anti-war struggle. Today's event will include a panel of speakers that we've just introduced and time for question and answer. So you can document your questions in the chat, give your comments throughout, and register anything for the discussion at the end. We hope to keep the chat respectful and comradely to really honor the experiences and perspectives, and give this the respect and attention that it deserves. And we ask folks to stay on mute if you're not speaking. And a second reminder, please to speak slowly for our interpretation team and take pauses after you speak so we can keep this space multilingual. Um, yeah, so welcome everyone. We will get started with the event with a brief political context and just sharing the thinking behind why to have this particular conversation in this moment, including political context about the current US-Israeli war still raging on Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine, and how the region is responding against US aggression. Um, then we'll open up some questions and I'll have a moderated conversation with our panelists and then go into Q&A and close with campaigns and calls to action. Um, so yeah, throw an emoji on the screen or say something in the chat if you are ready to have this conversation and build up our energy and our fight together against US war to stop the war in Iran, against Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine. So yeah, we're going to get started with the sharing of the current context of this war. which the Resist US-led War movement has prepared. I'll present it. Yeah, so here we go. First of all, first and foremost, we have to say that this is a clear US and Israeli war of aggression. This is a war of choice that Trump and Netanyahu and their cronies have entered into. And it is a war built on deliberate US lies and decades of hybrid warfare. This did not start in this current moment, but the recent escalation is something we must vibrantly oppose. This pattern of aggression and policy of the US goes back over 4 decades since the 1979 revolution. And the US policy has included sanctions, assassinations, political blackmail, invasions, and attempts at regime change against the sovereign Islamic Republic. The United States has a massive propaganda apparatus at work to smear this independent country and hijack the narrative to try and justify US intervention and regime change, even as the US stated goals change from moment to moment if you follow Trump's Twitter account. Even those close to President Trump now see how big of a mistake this war is and how significant it is in today's changing world with the US in a crisis. The US system and powerful role in the world is in crisis. It's facing this crisis of legitimacy and internally has its own economic, political, currency, and uh, and social crisis. That's why we see all of these forms of violence continuing to escalate. In West Asia, leading up to the February 28 strikes, the Trump regime spewed so many false claims about Iran's intention to develop nuclear weapons. And we have to be historical about this and remember this is the same false pretense of weapons of mass destruction.
Hey, Carly, one sec from interpretation.
Yeah, I'll slow down.
If you wouldn't mind going back a little bit to the February strikes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, so leading up to the February 28 strikes, the Trump regime spewed false claims about Iran's intention to develop nuclear weapons. And this is the same historical false pretense of weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, thanks, John. Sorry, I'm speaking too fast. The same as the false pretense of weapons of mass destruction that was used to justify the 2003 war on Iraq. 23 years later, the US is using the same racist and Islamophobic narratives to try and justify a new forever war for oil, geopolitical dominance, and US control over resources and trade routes. The people of West Asia who are standing up again against the US are the ones changing the world every single day. And our solidarity and commitment to struggle against all US-led wars has to continue to deepen and expand. Now, 907 days into the Gaza war and genocide, the world is decrying the US and Zionist war crimes, the genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign. And we have seen millions out in the streets against this war. And this is now a key moment to grow really vocal, loud, mass opposition to US war and to stand with Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine against these US-Israeli assaults. So that's really why we're here today, is to contribute to that broadening to bringing more and more people in, and to do the education work as well, so people understand why to stand up against war against Iran, just like people have been standing up for Palestine, um, and fighting back. How are my interpreters doing? We're doing good? Okay. Great. Thank you guys. Uh, so what is the current context of the US war of aggression? We want to provide a little bit of information to ground the conversation. On February 28, just about a month ago, during so-called diplomatic talks, US and Israel launched missile strikes against Iran, launching the military campaign that they later named as Operation Epic Fury. In the last month, the US has struck more than 10,000 targets across Iran, murdered over 2,000 people, including assassinating the martyred Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters, ballistic missile facilities, drone production centers, and naval assets. The US and Israel have the blood of civilians, children, young girls on their hands. We join the people in mourning these martyrs and pray for their families as they grieve their loved ones while countries are still under bombardment. Um, the targeting of homes, hospitals, and schools really show what Iranian authorities have described as a deliberate campaign against the country's civilian infrastructure, marking a sharp escalation in the destruction. According to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, the assault has damaged 90,000 residential units in Iran, alongside 300 health facilities and at least 760 schools. After 15 months of daily violations of the so-called ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, just days after the initial attack in Tehran on March 2nd, Israel began an intensified bombardment campaign against the Lebanese people. Through evacuation orders, bombardment, and attempts at ground invasion, the Israeli military has expanded its assault to more Beirut neighborhoods, as well as a much larger portion of southern Lebanon and eastern Lebanon, displacing over 1 million people, murdering over 1,000 people, including resistance fighters or de combat or out of combat, children, women, medical workers. This whole situation mimicking strategies used during the Palestinian Nakba. And so, what do we need to know, about the destruction and what the U.S. war plans and moves have been so far? Because we need to study what the U.S. war machine is doing in order to fight against it. Um, what began a month ago as a joint U.S.-Israeli air campaign, supposedly targeting Iran's military infrastructure, has now, 1 month in, expanded into the largest deployment of soldiers to West Asia since the Iraq War. This includes deployment of aircraft carriers like the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is operationally active in the combat zone, and the carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, which is temporarily out of action for repairs. This is the ship that's had all of the plumbing problems, the fires, and Trump has changed the narrative several times on these fires, misleading information. Um, in the case of the USS Ford, this is the longest that it's been deployed away from its base, in history. It moved immediately from the war front against Venezuela to the war front against Iran. And many of the soldiers on board um, are not happy anymore being out there. There have also been American military casualties in this war. To date, at least 13 U.S. service members have been killed, and 290 U.S. troops have been wounded. This is the numbers according to U.S. Central Command. Iran has reported that at least 24 American soldiers have been killed in this war. And we need to say that their blood is also on the hands of the US and Israel for this illegal war and war of choice. Um, and just last week, to get into the current situation, Trump issued a 48-hour ultimatum for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face strikes on its power plants. And just hours before this deadline expired, he announced a 5-day extension. On Tuesday, last week, the Pentagon ordered approximately 2,000 soldiers from the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division to begin moving to West Asia. This division is considered to be the Army's emergency response force and can typically be deployed on short notice. This deployment adds to two Marine Expeditionary Units who are already en route from opposite sides of the Pacific. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, I can't see his face anymore. He is confirming, though, that CENTCOM has requested the reinforcements to expand operational operations supplementing 50,000 troops already in West Asia. Um, this is 10,000 more troops than the standard deployment, which we have to point out, it's not normal to have 50,000 American troops in another region of the world um, in these bases. This is pointing out that thousands of Marines aboard several Navy ships now will be headed to the region or have already arrived. While the US pours all these troops, weapons, deployments, and billions of dollars into this war, it's clear that the US is getting more and more desperate without any cohesive exit strategy for a war that Trump was stupid enough to start in the first place. Um, and the whole world is watching how Iran has responded. Iran has put forward a defiant, steadfast defense of its self-determination, has not backed down, and is defending its sovereignty. It has a policy of tit for tat retaliation against the US-Israel attacks. Immediately, within hours after the US strikes, Iran launched Operation True Promise 4, a series of missile strikes aimed at the Zionist military sites and US outposts across West Asia. Despite Trump's blusters of destroying Iran's military capacities, after saying that they had no more ballistic missiles or they had no more munitions, Iran has continued to send wave after wave of strikes against locations tied to the genocide in Gaza and on bases used for intelligence sharing and logistics support that have aided in decades of U.S. wars in the region, including the ongoing U.S.-Israel campaign against Iran. Other regional resistance in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen have acted in concert with Iran in striking U.S. and other NATO countries' military bases in Bahrain, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Cyprus. These Iranian operations have also successfully struck Israel, hitting targets in several areas of the occupied Palestinian territories, causing major damage to buildings and killing dozens. On Saturday, Iranian missiles struck Israeli towns of Arad and Dimona close to a nuclear research center. And Iran, for example, said this was a response to the Israeli attack on its Natanz nuclear facility in Isfahan province. Um, it's clear that Iran is laying down the conditions for ending the war And this exit strategy of the Trump regime isn't working, even though Trump has declared victory many times. The war won't end unless Iran's conditions are met, which is an actual end to the aggression and assassinations. And Iran has been firm in saying it will end the war on its own terms, on its own timing. It requires ending the war on all fronts, and Iran has not left behind Lebanon in declaring this. And it guarantees against the recurrence of aggression and payment of compensation to Iran. And it establishes a mechanism over the Strait of Hormuz under Iranian control, which has already been um, which has already been implemented through Iran's own action. Um, just for the sake of time, we'll note that the regional resistance has joined these military operations and has also taken these actions, opening up new fronts of this counterattack against US and Israel. And we can keep in mind that this is a war that will really reshape the regional balance of power and challenge the US once and for all in its wars of plunder, occupation, and genocide against West Asia. Um, and there's some points here that our panelists will get into. Please, let's bring up points around what is the US military strategy? Um, what is the playbook? How does this connect to the wars historically? Um, what is the status of this fake argument around democracy that Trump and the US is have used over many, many wars? And what can our movements do? How do we show up as community members? How do we confront the war machine um, from those places where we're closest to it, whether it's our communities being recruited into the military, whether we've served, whether our family members are in this military, are in the US military, whether we're veterans, and how can our movements take up this fight. The point of this event today, to close, is to help our uh, conversations come together. So for GIs, conscientious objectors, our families, our youth, how we build a broader movement and speak out against this war. How do we learn from history, study, and act in the present in order to change the outcomes of the future? Historically, all of our voices together, but particularly those closest to the military, who choose to dissent, have turned around US wars, especially when in partnership with liberation struggles on the ground. So, this conversation can help us learn lessons from how we resist US wars and contribute to growing and strengthening our movements to the point where we can defeat US imperialism and build a just and lasting peace. So with that context, it's really great to dive into the questions here, or we're ready to dive into the questions. So, yeah, really excited to hear from you all. If we can start with this one, please add anything you want to your introduction and what kind of work you do, what your organizations do, and tackle this first question. Why do you personally oppose the US war on Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine, um, knowing that there's other fronts of war like Venezuela ongoing as well? And what do you think people need to know about this war? Can I pass it to you, Sonia, to get us started? And a reminder, everyone can join one of the interpretation channels if you don't understand both English and Spanish. Go ahead, Sonia.
Muchos saludos, muchas gracias.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to participate because the truth is that this is something without precedent. The US has been leading historic wars that always lost. My son was lied to, was fooled when George W. Bush was president and he was recruited into the army. the threat of the weapons of mass destruction convinced them to join. Here in the US, we always have a saying, follow the money. And the truth is, we have to follow not just the money, but the oil. The US is hungry because within the capitalist system, within the system that is an imperialism, is to colonize people, steal their resources. And the lie that was told in Iraq today is repeated in Iran. It is a fable that this is a war that is about preventing violence. This is false. No country has the right to invade another country. It is a fallacy to say that we will invade in order to prevent the development of nuclear weapons. In Venezuela, they also lied that it was about narco trafficking. It is also a lie to say that in Venezuela that there was no resistance.
Pero Irán sí le ha puesto resistencia. Y todos los analistas que saben el asunto de las guerras plantean que Estados Unidos tiene las de perder porque la resistencia iraní es muy fuerte. Entonces,
we know that there is resistance in Iran. Us and Mothers Against the War are present. I was present during the Vietnam War.
En las Fuerzas Armadas. Es una campaña permanente.
Know that Mothers Against the War have a permanent resistance to all wars.
Día Internacional de los
On May 1st, that is when we started. That is the date in which we started Mothers Against the War. And on May 1st, we will continue the struggle against this war, which is unjust.
It's really important that we tell these stories and keep telling these stories of the wars that our family members have been dragged into and what consequences those have had. Next, we'll go to Josh with the same question. Why do you personally oppose these wars, and what do people need to know?
All right. So yeah, I'm Josh Shirley, Army veteran, current board member, National Vice President of Veterans for Peace. So first of all, thanks for having me on, Carly, and thanks for the organization. And it's an honor to be here with fellow speakers and with everybody listening. So yeah, I mean, I'm a Army veteran from the Gulf War era. I served through most of the 90s. Left active duty just prior to 9/11, and went to school, became a conflict researcher. Was watching a lot of the us getting into Iraq and Afghanistan really from the sidelines. As a graduate student researcher, my doctoral dissertation was on at that time the newly created AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command. That was sort of a new thing at that time. And so part of my field research was going among units that I once served in, that were going around and doing sort of special operations training around Africa within the so-called global war on terror. And that's really where I came to be involved with peace work, and really coming to see the true costs of war more than anything I ever did in uniform was conducting that research, talking to the people who were affected by U.S. interventions. Because even in the military, when we deploy, we're often in a bubble. But being with these people, listening to their experiences, then going back and interviewing military personnel, you see that juxtaposition of just complete lack of understanding that often even supposedly well-educated and informed American military and diplomatic people were bringing to the table, which just wasn't much. So to the question though, why I personally oppose these imperial wars, because the actual effects and the consequences of these actions are destructive. Obviously, they're destructive, of course, on the people um, who were supposedly waging these wars for. They're destructive to the American population who have to sacrifice and pay for these things and go without so much so that these wars can be paid for. And it's also destructive to the military personnel here in the U.S. The so-called war fighters, to use a term that Pete Hegseth likes to throw around. This stuff is destructive for all except those
Hi,
who
Josh.
profit
So
and
sorry.
gain.
Can you slow down a little bit just for the interpretation, if that's okay?
Sure, I will do my
No
best
worries.
to slow down. Sorry about
No
that.
worries.
Yeah, so the people of the so-called global South, the people of the global majority, as I prefer to call them, know more than anyone that the destructive nature of these interventions, and so just seeing that that amount of destruction, both the actual violence, the physical violence that happens, but also the structural violence, the long term deprivation of people not having the resources that they need, and so on. That's also in some ways, I don't want to say it's worse, but it's just as destructive as the brutality of the military violence. And so all of this really informs my work in Veterans for Peace. I've been involved with VFP for about 8 years now. And to me, it really comes down to, the need to unlearn so much of the of what has become normal in our society. And if there's one thing that I think people need to know about this war, but also really all of this stuff, it's that these wars, these struggles, are connected. Um, and they are connected to one another, whether we're talking about Venezuela, Cuba, Puerto Rico, it's so many places um, across Africa. There are a lot of places that we could talk about. Iran. All of this is connected, and it's connected to the struggles here at home, here in our own home communities in the United States. Um, I recently returned from a delegation to Venezuela, where we went to some of the sites that were attacked back on January 3rd. And the impression that I got just from seeing what happened on the ground, and Sonia did a wonderful job of talking about the lies that are told about the attacks there. There were civilian apartment buildings that were hit. There was a UNESCO World Heritage site that was partially destroyed. It was, it was incredibly destructive and traumatic for the people who experienced it, of course. But what struck me was how similar that some of these tactics were to what we see the Israelis do. Going after centers of learning, that kind of thing, and of course civilian infrastructure. Just it's the abhorrent stuff that we have gotten used to seeing for the last 3 years coming out of Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, if there's anything I would take away from all this, it's the need for solidarity, the need for connections, and yeah, and how we can bring our struggles and our resistance together. And with that, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Yeah, it's really important. And it helps wake people up, especially when folks formerly in the military speak out and point out what's not normal. There's nothing, there's something very systemic about the US wars stretching back so many hundreds of years, from the colonization of this place, to the very bombings that are happening as we speak. in West Asia. So thank you for helping us remember that it's not normal. And with that, we'll pass it to our next speaker, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Happy to be here, and I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. My name is John Marcantoni, and I am an Army veteran. I served in between 2011 and 2015. Um, very fortunately, was not sent to an active combat zone. Um, but of course, the military experience affects us in many ways. I think one thing that I expressed to Carly when she first asked me to be a part of this panel is that we focus so much on warfare as being the one thing that damages veterans and damages people who interact with the military. It's actually the whole experience. And when we talk about, I mean, like Josh was talking about the foreign intervention and presence of military personnel in some of these communities and countries that didn't ask for it. Um, it creates a stressful impact on them and an impact on their resources and on their daily lives. That doesn't have to include bombs, doesn't have to include bullets or even threats of violence. There is a presence of violence in having your day-to-day life interrupted by military personnel. And I suppose that's a big reason why I oppose these kinds of actions. And and I gotta say, like, I mean, the main thing that alarms me about the different conflicts going on right now is that they seem to be being waged by very old men who have no concern for the future, who have no concern for anyone but themselves, who are acting really on very like transparently selfish reasons. We know Trump's own criminally tied reasons for wanting to do something like this, but also, Netanyahu, basically all of his decisions are tied to trying to avoid a corruption trial and getting thrown into jail. And uh, Putin needs to be in jail. He's a horrible war criminal. All these guys are criminals, and this is just a way to extend their time in power. And it's very reminiscent of what the leaders were like leading up to the First World War, which I won't go off into a rant about that. But just people who are in a position of power and have no accountability or even even attempt to act like what they're doing is for the greater good. It's about themselves. And the actions behind all these different conflicts are blatantly stupid. They're not well planned. Um, and that's just on the very fundamental level of like this is not meant to benefit anyone aside from the men that are waging the wars themselves. Um, and I kind of skimped on on the biographical details of myself, but I'm active in Boricuas Unidos de la Diaspora, which is how I became introduced to this panel, and also um, I've dedicated my life since leaving the military to try to better better create better opportunities and create opportunities for Puerto Rican artists, both on the island and in the diaspora, and to connect our communities so we can be a united people, because that's not always been the case. And I do that through my theater work with Flamboyant. And yeah, and I basically I see my activism is art and is creating opportunities for artistic expression for my people, and yeah, that's why I'm here.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's really important that we find all possible people who can unite and fight against the number one aggressor and threat to peace in the world today, which is the US empire, and to do that from every possible location. So, yeah, really grateful to learn more from you and also to hear more about the cultural work that you're doing to defend and build up. Cultural resistance too, and in defense of Latin America. So thank you. And we'll go next to Coco and then on to Wendy.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm here representing Juventud Unida por la Independencia, or United Youth for the Independence of Puerto Rico. We're a national youth and student sectoral mass organization that is working toward an independent and socialist Puerto Rico. So a majority of our work focuses on building the mass movement, educating ourselves on our history and the current conditions of our people, and mobilizing to demand an end to the exploitation and expulsion from our homelands as a result of colonialism. So that's just a little bit about us. To answer the question, the US has always intervened with sovereign nations in order to destabilize them, so it is easier to extract their resources, which is why the US is the number one imperialist in the world, whether through wars with bombs and fighter jets or proxy wars and sanctions. The United States seeks to continue its predatory relationship and prey on any nation that seeks to declare its sovereignty and sustain that their resources are for the livelihoods of their own people. And we see this even in its continued colonization of Puerto Rico. So I'm going to speak specifically on how US-led wars have impacted our homeland. From the beginning of colonization, Puerto Rico's land and people have been used for US wars of aggression. Our youth enlist at high rates because it's viewed as one of their only opportunities for economic stability, and it's marketed to them as such. And as an organization, we dream of a world where our youth can focus on building a Puerto Rico that they can stay, where they can stay while nurturing and sustaining the communities around them. Let it be known that the US has used Puerto Rico in order to carry out its wars across the globe, like since its invasion in 1898 during the Spanish-American War, with the intention of creating a large and powerful navy. So this is why securing Puerto Rico during that Treaty of Paris in 1898 was so important. And over the course of US colonization in Puerto Rico in the 20th century, the United States has inaugurated 25 military installations in Puerto Rico. And that ranges from small troops to large legions and land dedicated to military bases. The largest US military projects in Puerto Rico have been Roosevelt Roads, Naval Station in Ceiba, the Atlantic Fleet Training Facility in Vieques, Fort Buchanan in Guaynabo, the US Ramey Air Force Base in Aguadilla. The list goes on. The few other things I wanted to know is that some of these bases have been closed by the power of the people in Culebra in 1974, in Vieques in 2003. However, they have been reopened as a result of the rising escalation in Venezuela and across the globe. And we recognize that the recent remilitarization of our homeland is in the hopes that the US can gain control over different regions of the world that have access to these large oil reserves. And this has been the justification for reopening these bases. I also want to name that the war on Iran has had a massive impact on the global economy due to it being the largest oil shock in history. The Philippines has declared a national emergency and is now rationing energy because it doesn't have enough oil due to this war. There are countries that are being forced to release oil from their emergency reserves. Oil prices only continue to rise as a result of this war, as it continues. And even while Trump paused the Jones Act, which prevents from any trade happening directly from any country to Puerto Rico, he put it on pause for a while so that some of the oil shipments that were meant to go to Cuba, which he has blocked because of the recent embargo, the intensification of the embargo, he's put a pause on that Jones Act so that those shipments can be redirected from Cuba to Puerto Rico, claiming that this would alleviate some of the rising prices in Puerto Rico. However, gas prices are up in NPR, even as high as $4.25 a gallon, even outside of the metro area. There's no public transportation. People rely on cars, and they cannot afford that high of a price to just travel across the archipelago. And so, despite decades of data indicating contamination of the land and its people being directly related to military presence, Puerto Ricans are yet again forced to withstand bombing and military exercises taking place in their homeland and the continued recruitment of our youth. And my 3 minutes are up, I believe, but yes. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it takes so much inspiration from the liberation struggle in Puerto Rico, because it's so clear that when the people fight and uh, fight for their independence against the sellouts that are letting the land be used for the US military, the colonies strike back and fight for their freedom, then the US war machine loses its outposts. So, yeah, thank you for being here, Coco. And yeah, to pass the mic to our final panelist for the first question, I'll pass it to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Carly. I definitely want to shout out our Boricua relatives. They're the first, if not one of the few folks to fight off the U.S. Marines ever in Vieques. So we have a lot to learn. Apologies. We have a lot to learn from them. So please, folks, take notes. My name is Wendy Bravo. My pronouns are she, her, ella. For the purpose of this conversation, I am a combat veteran, United States Army, combat medic. I occupied the sovereign nation of Iraq for 9 months. I am a detribalized, reconnecting, and reclaiming relative from so-called Mexico. We can have that conversation on another day. And furthermore, I am the manager for Decolonize You for a nonprofit organization called Honor the Earth. I'm going to do my best to slow down for our interpreting homies. We are an Indigenous-led organization who is dedicated to defending Mother Earth, and we do that through our North Star, that is Indigenous sovereignty. Yeah, so we protect land, water, life on Mother Earth. And so, to your question, why do I personally oppose the U.S. wars on Iran, Lebanon, Palestine? Really, anywhere that these colonizers stick their noses in, for a lot of reasons. I'll begin there. Number one, as an Indigenous person that respects and cares for this home, our home, and tries to live like in synergistic and symbiotic relationship, war is antithetical to all life. Period. Punto. The end. Fact. Full stop. As a woman that's capable of creating life, antithetical to life. Period. Punto. The end. As a community medic, as an organizer, antithetical to life, antithetical to everything that I work with. I did not take the Hippocratic Oath, though I do support it, and I do try to. I've trained numerous cohorts of medics in my life. It's antithetical to everything that I stand for as far as life sustaining, right, and affirmative programs. And lastly, as a sustainability professional, my degrees are in urban sustainability. If you look at the lessons that ecology teaches us, we are messed up in our relationship as far as centering ourselves as humans, right? Taking an anthropomorphic um, point of view to our relationships. So I will, that will be my intro. As far as your question, what do I think people need to know about this war? So many things, but I'll keep it to one for now. Um, the United States military really likes to think itself as, you know, high powered and super tech and, launching surgical precision. Um, yes and no, right? We've seen a lot of so-called blunders. We can we can try to debate that, the morality and the justification of that, right? We're very capable at taking human life, right? The terrorists really are the United States empire, right? I think few of us who have served empire are able to make that moral jump from, hold up, are we the baddies? Like, are we the baddies, right? And so I say all that to say that this war is being painted much like all the other wars, that it is winnable because we have the tech, right? It is winnable because we can deploy all of this. And now the latest narrative is, of course, AI, right? And the physical manifestation of that is in the military industrial complex are the data centers, right? The One sec. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has it more right than any of us, right? They issued a communique earlier, or yesterday rather, warning, right, colonial empire that AI companies are now targets, right? And frankly, rightly so. And so on that list, we see Intel, right? We see Oracle. We see who, by the way, is caught up also in the abduction and deportation of our indigenous relatives up and down Turtle Island. Google, IBM, Palantir, NVIDIA, etc. And so what we need to know about this war is that the manifestation of the military industrial complex is literally in our front and backyards. We have an obligation as people who live in the imperial core, and I'm going to assume that most of us do, to fight back against these data centers, right? Particularly AI. AI, of course, is the abstract, you know, intangible thing of it, but we see that manifestation with data centers. And so that is the latest frontline attack on our water, on our land, on our people. Punto, period. Right? That is the front line right now for the military industrial complex. And so what we need to know about this war is that that is the heart, that is the head, the data centers of what's powering Iran. And thankfully, Iran understands that, right? We as Indigenous people understand that. And that is our main campaign right now, is fighting back AI and data centers on Indigenous lands, on our reservations, and continuing to follow our North Star, that is Indigenous sovereignty. I will check there.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Yeah, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to those people who it wasn't clear to already that the US is the number one terrorist in the world today, that it has so many tricks and turns that it uses to uh, manipulate that narrative, but that's the facts. And that the defense of land and sovereignty is the solution to fight back against that. Whether we're targeting the war profiteers or the war mongrels themselves. But it's up to the people power to fight back. I think we have a little bit of background sound from you, Sonia. So you might want to check your sound. Um, yeah, okay. That's better. Thank you. Yeah, so again, welcome to everyone who's here on this conversation. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I think this is the power of unifying our movements to strike a shared blow against shared targets. And right now, more than ever, every effort to bring more people into this fight, whether we're coming from specifically a veteran's perspective, whether we're coming from an Indigenous perspective, whether we're coming from the environmental movement, whether we are young or old, and we all have a stake to fight right now, and we have a responsibility, I think, is something else that every single speaker here has brought up. So we'll get into the second question. This will be a specific question to each panelist to deepen your perspective. So we'll start first with Sonia. Sonia, yeah, we're so honored to learn about why you formed Madres contra la Guerra. And we still have that sound effect on you. I'm not sure if there's something touching your mic, or we can.
I wonder if it's the
Uh,
fan.
yes,
Do
it
you think
was. Yeah, it's better now.
better now?
Yeah. I think it is the fan. That's okay.
Let's
We want
turn
you
it
to
up.
be comfortable. But yeah, let's here's the question. Can you tell us
I'm
about, oh, sorry.
I am speaking in English. Okay, so I founded Mothers Against the War because, as a pacifist, I understand that there's no way that you can justify your son going into the military, especially the fact that we're a colonial territory, and there's no way that I was going to sit idle and justify the fact that he was fighting the US capitalist uh, oil reserves profit. So that was something that I had to do. So I founded it. And at the beginning, you have to realize that the public opinion in the United States and in Puerto Rico at that time was 100% behind George Bush. Oh, yes. And they called me communist. It was an honor. And they called me that we were independentistas, striking, um, going for the independence of Puerto Rico, which was an honor. So we did it. We did it, and time has changed. Now the public opinion about Iran here in Puerto Rico, as well as in the United States, it is against the war because remember, the United States has lost a lot of wars and people are not very happy about it. In fact, let me share you a very important piece of information, and it is that the admissions to uh, armies and the other branches of the military, it has lowered at least 30% in Puerto Rico on the army side, a little less on the other ones of all the branches. But so the public opinion here in Puerto Rico against the military is very off. And I wonder why. And it has to do a lot about Mothers Against the War because for 23 years we've been telling on the radio, on the press, on the TV about the reality of the US wars and the effects that those wars have on our own families. Because in Puerto Rico, everywhere I go and I give a presentation, I always ask, who do you have? Do you have a military family? And hands are up. Because in Puerto Rico, remember, the ranks of the military are formed with poor people, or the unemployed, the ones that are cast away from the capitalist society, the ones that lives in the projects and in the barrios. And so it is very important that we identify not from a paternalistic attitude like, oh, we know everything. No, no, no. Be humble and talk to the people. We go to the schools, we go to the universities, we go to the festivals, we go everywhere. And also, we have learned to use the social media. We have a TV channel on YouTube. We go to Instagram. We have TikTok, Facebook, Blue Sky, everywhere, everywhere. Be cognizant, and every day of your life, devote yourself. Ask yourself, what do I do? What did I do today to enhance the quality of life of the people? Because ultimately, what we want is for the people to enjoy the quality of life that it is deserved for everybody, not for the oppressors. No, 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 no. We want everybody. And in that regard, we have to uh, empower ourselves with also joining other struggles. Like, for instance, on Sunday here, we marched 50,000 of us. We went to Old San Juan to denounce the construction of an ethnic cleansing site that they want to build in one of our most beautiful beaches, Boquerón in Cabo Rojo. So there we were, Madres contra la Guerra. And the media saw us and they talked to us. And we went on the radio and we went on TV because people know when we talk, Esencia no va. That's the name. They are so clever. They use Esencia, which means essence, trying to instill in us this opportunity that we're going to be essential. No, 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 no. Let me tell you something else. I am talking to the leaders of essence of the struggle against essencia, and I'm saying we have to do the same thing that we did in Vieques. We have to get into the land. We have to do civil disobedience. And remember, we are not looking for protagonism. We are not looking on a vanity kind of thing, but we are being honored. On the 10th of April, they are going to give us Madres contra la Guerra, the Martin Luther King Medal. And that will be an opportunity for us to denounce all the things that they are doing to us in all the fronts. And we
That's right.
need you in the diaspora. We need you to be on the streets. And even if it's just one or two of you, that's how we started. Madre contra la Guerra. We were only two or three. And now, every Tuesday, next coming Tuesday, there will be number 128 picket lines in front of the Israel consulate in solidarity with Palestine. And last week, after the Esencia Nova March, we went and picketed in front of the Roosevelt Roads base. And we always say, those are not Roosevelt roads, those are the roads of our people. And they are so mean. They even tried to steal our name. It is not Roosevelt Roads, it's Ceiba. That town lost 41% of the land because Franklin D. Roosevelt went there in 1919 and he liked the place. Going to build a big naval station there, and he did. But anyway, I'm going a little bit out of my core. The core is we are on this with you guys together against colonialism, against imperialism, and the people united will never be defeated. Remember that.
That's right. Y Sonia, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. And yeah, that march was incredible to see in Puerto Rico, um, to see thousands and thousands of people out there really asserting that sovereignty. Um, and it's so important that we have the communication work that you do, the education work, and that people whose direct families have been taken advantage of in these wars are speaking out because as we speak right now, Trump is spewing more lies. He's on a press conference addressed to the nation right now where he is promoting the lies of against the Islamic Republic, where he's promoting the lie of the nuclear weapons, um, and is promoting the idea that Iran was a threat to the US and that it was some type of necessary operation. He even said that he's there to help and he doesn't need their oil. So we know that these blunders are annoying and disgusting and also so dangerous because behind the propaganda and the TV personality is a vicious U.S. war machine and imperialist system. So yeah, it's so important that we have the people to speak the truth and to keep speaking the truth every single day or every single Tuesday at the Zionist embassy or at every single base, like you're campaigning in Puerto Rico for a real alternative. Um, so with that, I'm wondering if we can go next to Josh. Josh, can you give us some context and speak to the tactics of resistance that have been used by the veterans movement to previous US wars, and then bring us into today to resisting illegal orders, the VFP campaign that is being organized against fascist military deployments, against ICE, occupations, and against the wars of aggression abroad. And what is VFP's current message to service members? What can veterans do now to speak out?
Yeah, thank you, Carly. So, yeah, a lot to say about that. So originally you were going to have Jerry Condon from Veterans for Peace on here, who himself was a Vietnam era war resistor within the military. He couldn't make it, so I'm sort of filling in. But I want to make some of the points that I know Jerry wanted to talk about because they are extremely important to the question you're asking. So just to go real quick, to go back to the example of the American war on Vietnam, you know, the common story that we are often told, and I know I grew up with this story, is that you had the U.S. military fighting, doing what it was doing in Vietnam, winning all the battles, right, accomplishing military objectives and all that supposedly. Meanwhile, back at home, you had the radicals on the campuses and the anti-war left that was undermining the work of the military, and it was that protest at home that sort of undermined the war effort, right? Um, and that's not really the case. I've been fortunate enough to sort of learn from a lot of these folks, like Jerry and many others from that era within Veterans for Peace. And now, while the resistance at home was huge and was crucial, it was actually anti-war resistance within the military that was key to ending the war on Vietnam. And so that's a very proud tradition that most Americans are not aware of, and we really need to be because this is what will carry us forward, and what we're facing today. And it also speaks to you can see how desperate and how effective that was because the empire has worked really hard to erase some of this history. I mean, I served in some of the same units and some of the same installations where some of this resistance happened just a generation previous, and I never knew about any of it. So that's very much by design. So during the Vietnam War, you had the many uh, service members who deserted, for example, who refused orders. You also had those who did go to Vietnam, but then they they did all sorts of things to stall, to delay, to carry out their orders very poorly, and to basically just jam up the system and prevent things from working and prevent this evil from occurring. Um, there's actually a really great documentary film that I would highly recommend for people to take a look at. I think it's free on YouTube. It's called Sir No Sir by David Ziegler, I believe. It came out about 20 or so years ago. That talks about all this stuff. And again, it underscores this idea that resistance works. Much like a labor stoppage, right? I mean, you can't fight a war if the ships aren't running. You can't fight a war if the riflemen are refusing to pull triggers and things like that. And as for what we can do to encourage and to support GI resistance today, that's an ongoing question and problem that we struggle with. Personally, I would say this: we can do a lot to support resisting service members, but ultimately, it is the actions of the U.S. empire that is the greatest driver of service members into resistance. It's whether it's the cutting of benefits, those kinds of things, ICE raids in people's home communities, bombing girls' schools. I mean, we could go on and on through the list of atrocities, right? But they are not doing themselves any favors, and they are undercutting any loyalty or support they might have within the ranks, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, this current war in Iran is the most unpopular U.S. war that we've seen maybe ever at this early stage. I mean, we haven't really even gotten going yet, and it's already extremely unpopular, even compared to Iraq 20 or so years ago. And so the challenge is to support the current service members who are resisting, and we're hearing stories of that. I think you mentioned earlier some of the reports coming from the USS Gerald Ford, and it'll be interesting to hear some of that in the coming days. But to talk about the campaign, we have we work in support with things like the GI Rights Hotline, which is a resource that service members can use to get legal advice on how to apply for conscientious objector status, things like that. And the Center for Conscience in War is another great resource. So these are all ways that I would encourage those folks to reach out. And if it's people, if you know people in the military or know people who have families in the military, it's really important that we have these conversations. And the troops are having these conversations. They have these, but what I think it's really important is for them to understand that the American people care about them, support them, and don't want them doing these obviously despicable things that we unfortunately have gotten such a reputation for. So anyway, I'll leave it there. I think that's well past my time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Want to pass the mic to Wendy next. Um, if you could share as a native vet, maybe building off of what Josh said or bringing in another perspective, if you can speak on the connection points between the U.S. imperialist offensive that drives colonization and militarization here on Turtle Island, in this settler colony, and in West Asia against Iran and Palestine. And as someone who also um, was in the Iraq War, what parallels do you see between the buildup and process then in the war in Iraq to the current war against Iran?
Yeah, thank you for that, Carly. So our position, directly is one against settler colonialism and empire. And if you understand empire, then you also must be an anti-capitalist, right? You know that, and you understand that empire and capitalism require more resources, more land, more bodies, right? More, it's a machine, it's a beast. It needs to eat everything up. And so Iran is directly aligned with that endeavor. I think everyone here hopefully understands that. And so much like other occupations, and I think it's important to call it an occupation and not a war, because the framing matters in regards to what Iran is doing, what our Palestinian relatives are doing, what our Boricua relatives are doing, what our Hawaiian relatives are doing, and what our indigenous nations here on Turtle Island are doing. And that's resistance. That's defense of land. That's defense of life. That's defense of everything that is good and great and sacred in this world, right? And so I think the shift from one of calling it like war to occupation is a big shift in our analysis. Um, Also not unlike what, our Vietnamese relatives did as well. And so it's very similar to Iraq, it's very similar to Afghanistan. And so that's where I'll start. And then the second thing that I'll say too about it is that because it requires, more resources, more land, more bodies, um, we a lot of times maybe may arrive into our analysis like, well, this started with Iraq, or this started with Afghanistan, or this started in the, with Reagan, or this started in the Cold War, or this started. I'm gonna go ahead and take us back to 1492. This started in 1492, y'all. And so I do need us as a collective to understand that Indigenous sovereignty is directly tied, particularly to how the United States Army came about. If you look at how the United States Army came about, it's the root of it precisely became from fighting Indigenous nations, from fighting our Indigenous relatives, right? Once you understand that root, everything makes sense. Like, we got it, you good, right? And so we can take it from there. And then the third thing that I'll say on this point is that Aim Shazare talked about the imperial boomerang, right? He had different words for it, but it's important to understand this concept as well in terms of like what's happening in Iran, what's happening in our own streets with ICE in the abduction of our Indigenous relatives. Mind you, my people, our Indigenous relatives down, south of the border, we've been migrating up and forth these lands since time immemorial, right? And then white people got here and decided to say, this is what y'all need to do. I take personal offense to that. But all that to say that what we're seeing now, right, is an increase in the violence and the tactics that we exported to other lands return to us. And that is the imperial boomerang, right? And so now it matters, right? Because white folks, colonizers, they're getting a little heat under their collar, right? And if you're a poor white, then you understand that this is not new too, right? It's always that fire, that violence has been in some way or another at the front door, right? And so I think it's important to understand that piece of it for understanding where we are in hopefully end stage capitalism and these last fascist, like dying, gasping dinosaur breaths, right, of fascism and these old white men, right, who are just out of their depth and out of their realm in Swana, right? So not unlike, like I said, Palestine, the narrative for us, the analysis that we hold is that these are defenders of their land, right? In Palestine particularly, right? Like, if you say you're of the land, why are you cutting down the olive trees? If you say you're of the land, why are you polluting it with oil and PFAS and forever chemicals? If you say you're of the land, why are you contaminating water? Right? It's a very simple concept. And so to go on to your second question, how do I see the parallels between the buildup and process of the war in Iraq and the current one against Iran? And hopefully I'm going slow enough. I feel particularly passionate about these subjects. First and foremost, the manufacturer narrative, right? I mean, at this point, like, it's so old, y'all. Like, really, right? And I think it also speaks highly about like, it also speaks to like why the Department of Education has been under attack, why they're shoving AI down our throats, right? Our ability to critical think, our ability to be independent thinkers right now is more critical than ever. Sorry for the redundancy, but it is, right? These tech bros, their dreams is to outsource intelligence and sell it back to us, right? That makes for a perfect poor class where you continue to draft from. You continue, and I say draft because what we have is a socio-economic draft. We have a poverty draft in this country. Is it a formal draft? Okay, we don't need to get into semantics, but it is in essence a draft. It is a poverty draft, what we have. It's by design and it's engineered. And so this idea of like patriotism, right? We see it liberating, bringing democracy, freeing women, right? And what I say to that is like, is the democracy in the room with us right now? Like, do you see it? Are my freedoms as a woman, are they, please, somebody point them out to me. Where are they? I'm not seeing them. So it's this, again, trotting out this boogeyman, right, in Swana. Again, I think decolonizing our verbiage matters. So I've since stopped calling it the Middle East. It's now, for me at least, Southwest Asia and Northern Africa. I think that that distinction is very important. And so, yeah, the narrative piece, right? The other thing that I'll point to as well is, yes, thank you. I see the comments. And the other piece that I see about it too is it's, again, y'all, it's a class war, right? I hope I'm preaching to the choir here. It's very much a class war. The irony and the hypocrisy of a fascist who dodged a draft off bone spurs to now try and lead poor brown and black and white troops to the slaughter, y'all. It happened in Vietnam. It's happening now. It happened in Bush, right? So, not very bright people. I'll just say that, right? And so, yeah. And then the last piece I'll say on this too is like, we're seeing again kind of the biting of the ass in terms of like the forever war. And when I say that, it's, they want to be in there and they want to be done. And you know how much the Iraq war dragged on. It was a forever war. It continues to be in a lot of respects. Like we still have troops there. And we're setting that up to be now in Iran, even though our administration is delusional about how swiftly we're supposed to do this. But if you anchor back in reality, you know that the military industrial complex requires continuous inputs, right? The military industrial complex requires shareholder profits, right? And so I would check right there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Let's see. Okay, so we're gonna go next to Coco, actually. And just to be mindful of our time so we can get to the Q&A. Yeah, let's keep our answers to the point. I want to pass it on to, yeah, Coco, what type of conversations are you having with Puerto Rican youth who are disproportionately targeted for military recruitment about today's wars? And what's the impact of, you might have touched on this before too, what's the impact of US military presence in Puerto Rico on the youth and the future of Puerto Ricans?
Yes. So our organization has been engaging in a campaign called the Antonia Martinez Lagares campaign. Y muchas gracias, Sonia, por ayudarnos with this campaign. We had a meeting where we shared our knowledge and learned from Madres contra la Guerra. But it's a Puerto Rican pro-education platform against military spending in the name of Antonia Martinez Lagares, who was murdered by police in Puerto Rico while protesting the ROTC at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras in 1970. And so we've been gathering data from Puerto Rican youth and veterans and their position on U.S. militarism and education. John, I've seen your message. I'm gonna reach out to you. We're definitely gonna get that interview in. Um, so I'm gonna share some of our findings from our interview so far. In regards to reasons for joining, we've learned that Puerto Ricans often join the military due to a combination of either economic hardship, limited job opportunity, and the search for stability and purpose. Those who've been able to attend university are also struggling to find work, which leads them to see the military as the most reliable option for them in terms of income and benefits. Others have shared that they've hoped enlistment would allow for them to be able to explore and transform their lives in ways that their current reality would not allow. For example, one interviewee shared that he wasn't happy with his job as a janitor at the university of which he dropped out of. And he also felt that he didn't have the regimen or discipline to change his life. And he thought that the military would provide that for him. Others shared that they were looking for a sense of community that they could not find elsewhere in their lives. In regards to what they're currently experiencing after having served for a number of years, there have been accounts describing an environment marked by violence, as you can imagine, exploitation, and dehumanization. There are reports of predatory behavior, including the exploitation of vulnerable populations and even minors, which lead us to believe that there is a dangerous culture of impunity in the military. One interviewee shared, which was pretty astounding and scary to hear, that he had witnessed another soldier take their own life, and has himself had to intervene in other attempts. And so soldiers are often navigating a system where mental health struggles are minimized or dismissed, unless aggressively advocated for. And at the same time, they're forced to follow orders without question, which reinforces a culture that suppresses thought and self-autonomy. And while some of these interviewees acknowledge that their experience in the military does build a capacity to endure hardship, it comes through practices that are meant to break people down physically, mentally, emotionally. Abuse in multiple forms is normalized. It definitely is something that we also noted amongst multiple interviewees, that many felt a sense of shame and guilt in recognizing their complicity in an institution where they felt materially forced into by desperation and lack of options. So what is sold to them as a choice is more often coercion shaped by the colonial conditions. And some have shared that although their families have reaped the benefits of enlisting, such as cars, homes, the economic stability, it's often at the cost of broken bodies, chronic pain, deteriorating mental health. And the reality of service is not for them of glory, but extraction. And in regards to what sort of future that they want to see for themselves, that is not investing in the military, but many shared that they envision a future where they're able to return to Puerto Rico. They're able to care for themselves and their families and ultimately see the independence of their homeland. They shared that they wish they could pursue meaningful paths like art or trade work that aren't dictated by survival. There was a strong demand across multiple interviewees to shift resources away from militarization and toward sustaining systems such as healthcare, hospitals, schools, especially in places like Vieques, where basic services are disappearing or just haven't existed. And it's clear that the vision, the overall, what we've learned is that this vision rejects the idea that military is necessary and instead calls for investment in infrastructure, knowledge, and sustaining life in the archipelago overall. So that's what we've learned so far. And we're still conducting an interview. So if you know any Puerto Rican youth, any veterans, Puerto Rican veterans who would like to be interviewed, please let us know. I'll put our email in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for that work, Coco. It's so critical. 'Cause I've always felt in these movements we have to pass down the struggle from generation to generation. And if we're not learning the lessons from the struggle that kicked out the military bases in Puerto Rico, if we're not learning the lessons from the movements against the Iraq War, against the long-standing colonial struggles or anti-colonial struggles, then we're going to be yeah, doing ourselves a disservice and the future generations a disservice. So, yeah, thank you for that work. I wanted to propose, just based on the time, that we kind of combine the final question and the Q&A so that we can hear from the audience here, just so everyone knows what the question was going to be. Um, is basically just what lessons do people need to understand about America's wars and how to resist? And the very concrete question that we all need to think about, which is, what do people have to lose from joining or being complicit in today's wars? And what do people have to gain from resisting? I think all of our panelists really tackled these questions already. So you can keep those in mind, but we can actually take up some of the questions from the audience now. So would invite people to add your questions to the chat if you have any. We'll try and prioritize some of them and hear from as many people as possible. So if people could keep your questions short. If you have, yeah, so drop them in the chat or raise your hand and we will open up some of these conversations till about 7 Pacific. I know it's already 10, almost 10 in Puerto Rico. So thank you for being here. So first question is from Ale. Do you want to read your own question, Ale?
Sure. Hello, panelists and comrades. This has been extremely, it's just very juicy. I've been taking notes and I have a lot of things that I'm excited to talk about with folks in the chapter. But to skip to the question, I just was very curious of the internet's role in this and how essentially like as like the United States, we spoke of like the propaganda machine. I'm just very curious on y'all's like thoughts and feelings of how the internet and social media plays into it, like things like the manosphere, the general doom that a lot of like Gen Z feel when it comes to the world, and like even like bots, like at times like even like full out like having bots in chat in like comment sections. Just yeah, I just had thought like question about like how y'all like y'all's perspective on that
Yeah,
and like how to combat.
and if I can just dovetail on it, if you wouldn't mind focusing on this um, current uh, current war in that region, examples from what's going on right now in the war against Iran. Does anyone want to start with the answer or answer that question? Yeah, John, go ahead. Oh, you have to come off mute. Sorry.
I thought I pressed it. I'm sorry. Um, no, I appreciate that question because I think that the internet plays a really big role here in how we're consuming these conflicts. Um, I was a college student during the Iraq War, and there was nowhere near the amount of awareness. And I think that um, I think the internet has played a really big role, not just for like propagandistic purposes of, if you're of a certain political persuasion and the algorithm manipulating the kind of content that you receive. So like there in different like talk shows have even talked about this, like let alone academic sources of, if you go on Fox News, everything Trump is doing is win-win-win. And there's no negative connotation to anything that he's doing. But that's a propaganda that's existed for a long time. That's not new. What I think is new and I think is really important for young people, especially to realize, is not all of these things directly affect you. Not all of these things directly. I mean, a lot of what you're seeing online and what you're seeing on the other side of the world, it doesn't tie back to you. That doesn't mean that you can't care about it. That doesn't mean that, you limit your humanity in any sort of way. But what I mean by that is, yes, I think for terms of trying to show solidarity, it's good to say like, hey, I want to be there for others and I want to like recognize injustices that are happening in the world, but it doesn't have to connect directly back to you. And I think that the internet heightens a sense of personalizing these conflicts. And I think that's wrong. Like you are not in those war zones. You are not experiencing a war. But you can express your own like solidarity as a human being to saying like, hey, why am I okay with these other people suffering? And I think what the Iran conflict is having a real impact on a real like real world impact even outside of the internet is Iran is a major epicenter of the global economy. And what Americans have gotten used to is these things happen on the other side of the world. And I know it's terrible, but it's not directly affecting me. And the thing with Iran is it's directly affecting you. I really think that's actually where this administration fucked up, like with its own people, because like the largest bomb in the history of the world was dropped. I mean, that's not a nuclear bomb, was dropped in Afghanistan and barely anyone gave a shit. And that was back in the 2010s. That was in the first Trump administration. And and it's like, yeah, that doesn't really affect you, but the Strait of Hormuz affects you. And it's not just gas prices, it's also food prices are about to go up, fertilizer, and it's in part because fertilizer also goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so the ability to grow crops is also going to go up. It's not just gas. And and I think that it's an important lesson for Americans to realize that, hey, you can't just keep doing this to people and it not affect you. What is happening in Iran is going to directly affect you. And I think that that is where the internet in kind of giving people a larger conscience of what is going on around the world, it's going to actually hit your pocketbooks. It's going to actually affect you in your day-to-day life. And and I think that is going to have a big effect in changing some of the minds of some of these very brainwashed people on the right. And I think it's actually an opportunity for those activists out there who have been engaged on a human level from the start, for them to be able to say, like, hey, you know how you were giving me shit for supporting Palestine? And you know how you were giving me shit for advocating for these injustices going on in like Africa and things like that, that you're like, oh, what does that have to do with me? Well, guess what? This has to do with you. And guess what? It ties back to those other things. And because you allowed those other things to happen, it now led to this. And I
Yeah,
think that the internet
Jonathan.
actually serves as a positive tool for that. Moving on.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's really important to spread the information, and I appreciate how you're thinking about how to have these concrete conversations with, each person in mind, and how to bring people in from whatever place they're starting from. But yeah, Wendy, can you also take on this question?
Yeah, I want to push super briefly and shortly on what Jonathan was saying. The thing is that that bomb does affect the youth. The United States military is the number one institutional polluter and contributor to climate catastrophe. Let us sit with that for a second. And the reason why I bring that up is because that is directly robbing the future of our youth, of our future generations. And so if we think about like, oh, it's so removed and a bomb was dropped over there, everything that is happening right now in Iran, in Iraq, in Palestine, et cetera, is directly contributing to climate catastrophe. It is cutting down our time and our lifetimes hear us collectively and also the next 7 generations. Check.
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia. Just unmute you.
Hi. Well, I was wondering, I wanted to share with you how we have been successful in terms of demystifying the war propaganda. And that has been giving up precisely examples of people in the military. We have, for instance, on the Vietnam end, every single Veterans Day and also on Memorial Day, we use that opportunity to get veterans to and families of the veterans and military people and families of the military people to talk against not directly the US. No, 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 they would not do that. Most of them don't. But they criticize what happened to his or her relative on account of US colonialism and imperialism. They don't mention colonialism, they don't mention imperialism, but they describe the conditions. And in doing that, we have been able to penetrate the not the consciousness, but awareness of the people in many sectors of society that usually we are not able to get into that. So I think these wars are very important for us to touch bases on how this particular war is affecting you. I'm with John. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that interference and it's that moment where whenever people are ready and waking up and paying attention, in these moments of crisis, we need to broaden and strengthen our struggle and our movement. So yeah, thank you for the comments on this high-tech age and what it means to fight against war, because it's not true that the US, even with all of its huge war budgets, its high-tech weaponry, its militarization of all of society to create these horrific forms of warfare with technology, it's still the people who determine the outcome of these wars. And I think we're seeing that in Iran right now with the people's resistance. Um, I think there's time for one more question. I might try and combine some of these questions here. But people in the chat are asking about, um, especially for veterans who were involved in the Iraq War, the occupation of Iraq, um, do you have initiatives to combat pro-war propaganda? What types of formats of propaganda are you using? And then there's a related question. Um, Really, how do we build the alternatives? How do we give youth alternatives to join the military? And in this crisis of a society, how do we create a sense of belonging and purpose and real futures for ourselves, our families, um, when we don't want to support these wars? So maybe in those multiple questions, does anyone want to take that on? And then right after that, we'll have to hear a call to action and close out. So yeah, any thoughts?
I love this question. I'll take it. So when I do counter recruitment in high schools and universities, it's like my favorite thing to do. And get kicked out sometimes. It's fun. It makes the youth pay attention. I really get on my soapbox. Well, first, if you know anything about teenagers and like young adults, if you tell them what to do, they're not going to do that. But I really wish that like as a young Latina, someone would have like opened my eyes about what I was going to encounter in the military. And so like this is my way of like doing that in the past somehow, if that makes sense. And what I really harp on are their trades. So I think about like journeyman and plumbing and like construction and carpentry. because a lot of those are unionized, as we know, so the quality of life is great. Also, we have to think about I'm going fast. Also, we have to think about um, being in service to community and your peoples, right? The propaganda machine is so great that when we think of service, I think everybody here knows it, is in service of empire, right? And so undoing some of that decolonization in our minds for our youth in terms of like, okay, like let's ask some questions. What does it mean to serve your people? What does it mean to be a warrior for your people? Yeah, you want to go and like kill people over poor, brown, black people, indigenous people overseas. ¿Para qué? For what? Right? What is that going to gain you? Right? And so having these real critical conversations, and please feel free, like anybody here can reach out to me directly. Again, I love these conversations. I will drop my email in the chat. Um, and so yeah, I really want to harp on that point of like decolonizing our minds, right? If you're a settler, this especially applies to you, right? But it especially also applies to our Black and brown poor folks, our white folks as well. Decolonizing our mindset around what it means to be a warrior, right? What it means to serve. If you're the only one getting out of your hood and making it, right? And pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and nobody's coming with you, first of all, class analysis. Second of all, are you really winning? Let's talk about interdependence. Let's talk about how your win is my win too. Your failure is my failure too. If you failed, I had something to do with that as a person that you're accountable to, right? Ecology teaches us the web of life, right? And so when we have failures in that web, we're all responsible for that, right? And so I really want to encourage us, yeah, that decolonization analysis. You can check out my programming. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it. I'm really proud of it, y'all. And yeah, I definitely harp on the trades a lot. And the last thing I'll say, because I always get like at least one kid in the class who's like, well, my plan is I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that and I'm gonna do that. And my answer to that always is like, so you know how Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face? Every youth has a plan, and you should, right? But like life comes at you fast. And as well-intentioned as you want to be, right? Ish happens. So here's me telling you what you need to know, in my opinion, in my experience. If you want to go off and do that, go do that, right? But please know that someone told you, because I wish at 17 someone would have told me. Check.
Yeah. Pass it to you, Coco.
First of all, I couldn't have said it any better. Like Wendy, period. But also, this is something that actually has been like mentioned in some of the interviews that we've had with some of our Puerto Rican youth as well, and that a lot of them have shared that well, before I even get into what we've learned from the interviews of what some of our Puerto Rican youth have wished for instead of our investment in the military. Something that Sonia had shared specifically in one of our first meetings when we started this campaign where we were having these interviews is that really like encouraging our youth to understand like what is the like purpose and reason why they want to join the military and figure out ways that are essentially like alternatives that still speak to those passions and interests. So if, for example, if there's you know, someone who is joining the military and wants to join the Air Force, you know, like really trying to figure out, okay, what are some other alternatives that aren't, you know, the military that still allow for you to, you know, pursue that interest of like wanting to be a pilot. And so that was something that was like, duh, we could totally like, you know, do the research and figure out like what are some other pathways besides the military that still speak to your passions and interests. But something that specifically Puerto Rican youth have shared in their interviews as well is that they also felt that the education system in Puerto Rico specifically needs to be strengthened. One interviewee in particular named that going to college, he did not feel would better his material conditions and wish there was more dedication to those who wish to go into trades. And it's clear that Puerto Rican youth in particular want education that empowers them with political awareness, historical knowledge, and real pathways to thrive in their own communities. As a result of what is currently happening right now in La UP, the students have come together to really protest against the current president, Zaira Jordan Conde, who essentially was put into place as the president after there was a threat to cut 63 programs at the university as a result of budget cuts from La Junta. And since she's been in her role, sorry if you hear the ambulance in the background, but since she's been in her role, she has not really represented the student body. She's currently trying to fire a few of the different university heads at different campuses, and the students are really outraged right now and had an asamblea a couple of days ago, and they've put in motion a strike that is going to start on April 8th for a 72-hour strike. And so it's clear that the Puerto Rican youth want better education. They want to be in community with each other that really speaks to the real history of their people and ways that they can thrive and real pathways for themselves. And so that is something else that we also have learned and are continuing to learn from our current HUPI members who are students in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Coco. I think it's those alternative pathways right now. It's reaching the people where they're at right now, building those organizations that can reach the masses of these young people, and fighting for a society that is fundamentally restructured, where those pathways are invested in, where those real options for doing the type of work that is meaningful, owning your own labor, and your own workplace, and really restructuring things like education, things like medicine, things like science, so that these human capacities aren't going into these murderous wars. So that's really what Resist US-led War and all of our organizations mean when we say just peace, that we need a self-determination and we need these liberation struggles to win, so that when we lay down the groundwork for a peaceful society, it's one where these mechanisms of exploitation are no longer allowed to thrive. And instead, it's our land, our people, our water, and our social welfare that's thriving. Um, we just hit 2 hours into this conversation, and you always know you're with brilliant people when we run out of time because there's so much to talk about. So just want to thank everyone again. Especially check out the campaigns that our panelists have talked about. Please learn about the campaign against the bases in Puerto Rico, the campaign against Esencia Nova. Please learn about the Resist Illegal Orders campaign of Veterans for Peace. Check out I don't know the exact name, Stopping Data Colonialism,
No
the data,
data centers on
no data
indigenous
centers.
land because you can't drink data.
You can't drink data. That's right. So yeah, check out the Honor the Earth campaigns, and the Decolonize You. And please consider joining Resist US-led War. We're a network that serves these conversations, that serves these movements and activities so that really right now we can facilitate the process to keep fighting against these illegal wars, to fight against the US, all the mechanisms that allow for it to happen. That includes the bases, that includes the weapons corporations, that includes the supply chains, that includes the military colonies, and that includes the social and propaganda structures that allow for these wars to take place. Because the people aren't with Trump, they're not with Netanyahu, they're not with these wars. Um, they're with the people resisting US imperialism and militarism. And so find the local actions you can take whether that's advocacy, whether that's turning to the streets, whether that's disruption, whether that is being part of these organizations and doing the education. It's all important, and it's going to take all of us because we can't have another forever war. There's been too many lives lost. There's been too many families destroyed, and it's the time. The time is now to keep acting. So we're happy to unite with you, to find each other in the struggle, and come back to more conversations like this. So thank you again. Let's give another virtual round of applause to all of our panelists. But really, let's raise our fists and let's keep fighting. Thank you to our interpreters, to all of our panelists, and to all the people who've been informing these lessons, especially to the martyrs, to the children who have really should wake every single person up to fight and to resist. So, yes, thank you, everyone. We're going to close out here, and we'll continue the struggle.